year or so. The format of this talk will be about 40 to 45 minutes of a formal presentation by Mr. Mihara, followed by 15 to 20 minutes for you to ask your questions. If you're participating online, please place your questions in the chat box, and Susie will answer your questions in the appropriate amount of time. We ask that you conduct yourself in a courteous and respectful manner for all participants and hold your questions and comments until the very end at the appropriate time. If you're being disruptive, you may be asked to leave or removed from online participation. Mr. Mihara has some books available for you, and he'll be available to sign books after the presentation. So now to our featured event. When Sam Mihara was 9 years old, World War II broke out, resulting in the United States government using armed military guards to force over 125,000 people of Japanese descent to live in internment camps across the United States. Mr. Mihara will share his story of his family journey from San Francisco to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, and life thereafter, as chronicled in his book, Memories of Heart Mountain. Mr. Mihara attended the University of California, Berkeley for his undergraduate studies and UCLA for his graduate studies, earning engineering degrees at both. This led to a career as a rocket scientist and employment with Boeing Company, where he served as an executive on space programs. Following retirement, Mr. Mihara became a national speaker on the topic of mass injustice in the United States and helped in education and preservation of Heart Mountain Historic Landmark. He is a board member of the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation and of the Japanese American Citizens League. He has received many awards for his educational talks, including Paul Gagnon Prize and the History Educator of the Year, and the Japanese American Citizens League's prestigious honor, the Biennium Award for Education. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sam Mihara.
Can everyone hear me okay? Voice is okay, great. I'm always concerned about the audio. Before I begin, I want to give a quick credit to an organization here in Wyoming. And that's the Wyoming Humanities Group, and we're represented by one of their members today. The rest of the members were at Laramie this morning when I spoke at UW. But they paid for my airplane tickets and my hotel, so I love that. So that works out real well. This is probably an unusual story for most of you. I've given this talk over 500 times throughout the country, through schools, colleges. I regularly speak at Harvard and UCLA, and they keep asking me to come back. And so that's been my job all the time since I began about 14 years ago. But I learned over the years that people tend to remember my story if I make it personal. There's something about curiosity about people that want to know, what was it really like? How did he feel? And so I said, okay, I'm going to reveal my personal life. I'm going to talk about my family, show pictures, government photographs that look very personal. But the purpose is for people to remember. And so I call this presentation Memories of Heart Mountain. Can we cut the lights, then? Thank you. And it's really based on my memory of remembering what happened in those very difficult days. So I'd like to start by showing you a very short clip, a video made a few years ago by no less than President George Bush. And President Bush made a speech in Washington at the dedication of a new museum in DC. And in that speech, his first sentence, his very first sentence ran something like this. Let's watch it. Come on, movie. No, it's not, movie's not running. I don't know what happened. Let me try it again. All right, I give up. What he said was, a great nation does not hide history. A great nation does not hide history. Remarkable, and I use that phrase in every speech I've been giving recently because that was my purpose. I want to reveal things that most people don't know about, and especially to answer the question, why did it happen? Why do they put in prison families of a single race or group? Why do they do that? And that's the secret as to the story as to why, to talk about that. And that's the purpose of my talk. Oops, oh, okay, here we go. Wait a minute. I'm not getting any, oh, here we go, I'm sorry. The problem began a long time ago, before I was born, before my parents were born. Back in the 1800s, the media was putting out these kinds of political cartoons. And here's an Asian with a bloodied knife in his mouth and a smoking gun he's holding, and he's standing over this white woman he killed. And the caption says, "Yellow terror threatens white women." Asians didn't go around killing white women. It's ridiculous. But the point is, this cartoon served the purpose of getting hysteria among the public that all these immigrants who are Asians are dangerous, awful. But that was the initial start of the hate campaign in the US at that time, way back before my parents were immigrants here. But let me introduce you to my family. This is the Mihara family, picture taken around 1941. That defiant brat with the folded arms, that's me. I was 8 years old at that time. My brother's next to me, my father's behind me, and my mother's standing to the right. And Grandpa and Grandma Mihara are seated. The elder Miharas were the immigrants. They're the ones who came from Japan. And they really wanted to have success for a family. So what they did, the grandparents sent my father to a really good college in Japan. And his major was English. And so he graduated with a degree in English, is very good. And of course, he's good in Japanese. So what he did was he looked for a job. He found a job in San Francisco, working for a newspaper, a bilingual newspaper that caters to a combination of American as well as Japanese readers. And he wrote English articles. That's where he started, and he was very good. And he was promoted. He became the editor of the paper, and now he had enough money, so we moved into this beautiful house in San Francisco, a 3-story Victorian in the heart of San Francisco, with a gymnasium in the back. I mean, this is really a nice place to live. But it was very comfortable until December the 7th, 1941. And that day, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, life was miserable for people of Japanese ancestry as a result. And we started seeing these kinds of cartoons. Here is a Japanese soldier with a bloodied knife and a Nazi German soldier with his weapon, and they're both encroaching over the continental United States. And the caption says, "Our homes are in danger now." That really means it's the people living in the US who are of Japanese and German ancestry. They're the danger. That was the purpose of the cartoon, is to get all the readers hysterical. We've got to do something about this problem of all these immigrants from Japan and Germany and Italy, because we were at war with all 3 countries. So that was really a problem for people in the country who are of these races. President Roosevelt, he made lots of good decisions. After all, he led the country fighting 3 enemies, and he did a very good job. But he made a huge mistake on what to do about the problem of these Japanese and Germans and Italians. And that mistake was, he said, "I'm not sure what to do." He turned to his military advisors and asked for advice. What should I do? The military advisors told the president, "You should write an executive order. And that order gives the authority to the military to decide who to remove." It's out of his hands. But simply by signing that executive order, he gave the power to remove people to the military. Amazing. So as a result, who are the military who had the power to remove people? Well, here's a map of the United States with 5 military districts in 1942. There was an Eastern Defense Command. There was a central area, which includes Wyoming. There was a southern, there was a western, and a Pacific, which included Hawaii. So these 5 lieutenant generals had the power to remove people. And it turns out 4 out of the 5 said no. 4 out of the 5, it is Eastern, the Central, the Southern, and the Pacific generals said, no, I'm not going to remove these people, because 2 reasons. 1, they're good workers, and we need workers during the war. And number 2, no one's committed any crime. None of these people have conducted any crime at all. So why should it remove families? It doesn't make sense. However, this one general in the Western Defense Command, his name is Lieutenant General John DeWitt. John DeWitt. He hated Japanese. He didn't hate Germans, he didn't hate Italians, but he hated Japanese. We found out from his career, he's been fighting Japanese almost all of his career. And so he's developed this passion for getting after anyone who has at least a drop of blood of Japanese. That was his character. And as a result, he had no problem at all writing orders requiring anyone, what they call that, a drop of blood of Japanese, out of their homes in California, Oregon, and Washington, and place them in the interior, into camps that the government developed. Can we cut down to maybe the volume of the feedback? Is kind of, it doesn't bother me, but some people may find it irritating. Anyway, let me just continue on. As a result, General DeWitt had this power. So what's the evidence that a person has such hate? What trail does he leave? He left a photograph. He left a photograph that looks like this. These are children of mixed parents. That is, one of the parents was Japanese and the other parent was non-Japanese. General DeWitt found them in orphanages, because in those days it was popular to place children with mixed parents into orphanages, like the Little Orphan Annie story. And so as a result, General DeWitt found them, and he ordered every one of these kids. Look on the 3rd row, there are babies being held by Japanese guardians, and he ordered all of these into the prison camp. You're looking at a photograph at a prison camp in California called Manzanar, and clear evidence of how much hate that General DeWitt had. As a result, he wrote orders, and he gave orders that said, for example, you have 1 week to sell your possessions and get on the bus to take you to prison. 1 week, and that was a real disaster. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Many of you may recognize this photograph. This is a photograph by a famous photographer named Dorothea Lange. And Dorothea had a real skill at taking pictures of people. Now this one here is a photograph of a migrant worker in California at a farm. And during the Great Depression, the photographer was sent by the government to shoot pictures of these families. And she took this one of this family, and it shows clearly during that difficult time, this family had trouble putting food on the table to feed the family. And it shows in that photograph. And so with that skill, the government said, Dorothea, go to San Francisco, and we want you to take pictures of Japanese people in the process of our removing them to go to prison. But he gave instructions to Dorothea. Do not take embarrassing photos. Don't take pictures of armed guards forcing people out from their home. Don't take pictures of barbed wire fences and guard towers. That's embarrassing. But it turns out Dorothea doesn't take orders. She takes pictures she thinks are going to be important historically. And I'm going to show you some this evening. The first set of pictures she took, she came to my grammar school. This is a photograph of my grammar school buddies, the 4th grade, doing their morning Pledge of Allegiance. And the guy in the striped T-shirt, he was an interesting, good friend of mine. He's a Japanese American. And he went by the name of Hisashi Kobayashi. Now, the problem we all had was people don't know how to pronounce our names properly. And if you don't pronounce it right, it sounds terrible. So what we did was we developed nicknames or abbreviations. And in this case, Hisashi called himself Kobe, like the basketball player. So he became known as Kobe Kobayashi. And as a result, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Kobe. He turned out to be quite an interesting fellow. But he was one of my buddies in grammar school. Another photo taken by Dorothy is this one here, a group of three of them, Japanese Americans in the second row. The guy in the middle was given the name of Katsutoshi Ito. Katsutoshi is the first name. That's impossible to pronounce unless you know Japanese. And as a result, his father said that was a mistake. And he said, I'm going to rename you Willie. He became known as Willie Ito. And I'm going to talk about Willie. He really turned out to be quite a different person. The most famous photograph that Dorothea took of these Japanese kids is this one here. It's a group of second grade 7-year-old girls doing their morning of Pledge of Allegiance. And look at the facial expressions of all these girls. You can sense that when they give the pledge, they're doing their very best to show their loyalty, their allegiance to the United States of America. And so that became the most famous photograph, and it's been used in exhibits and books. And I'm going to talk about one of these girls in a moment. But all of you know, when you recite the pledge, there's an important phrase, and that very important phrase, and it reads, with liberty and justice for all. When an armed guard comes to your house and removes you, and then puts you on a bus to take you to a prison, you've lost liberty and you've lost justice because there was none. As a result, that was the most important complaint that we had after it was all over. That phrase is in the Constitution, in the 14th Amendment, that all American citizens will have liberty and will have justice. And we were denied both. And I'll get to that in my conclusion in a moment. So Dorothy kept taking more pictures. Here's a photograph of the newspaper, my hometown newspaper. And it had the title, Ouster, getting rid of all, and then that awful 4-letter J word. We hate that J word because of what it really meant. It was very derogatory, and I simply refer to it, as the J word. But here's a newspaper in a headline urging the readers to recommend to the leaders of this country, now's the time. We got to ouster them. We got to get rid of them. So the media was spreading hatred in their headlines. That was bad. But it wasn't as bad as this next one. This is a photo that she took of a billboard that went up a half a block from my house in the middle of San Francisco. And it said, bye-bye. And then that awful J word. I mean, how would you like it if somebody put a billboard in near your house and said, bye-bye, and then maybe your religion or your racial group or some other group affiliation? That'd be awful. But it happened. It happened in my town in 1942 in San Francisco. So Dorothy kept taking more photographs. Here's a family getting ready for the move. And the children are wearing dog tags. I remember my tag. I was 9 years old and I had a tag. And it had my name and it had my prisoner number. The government gave me a prisoner number. I'm not a criminal, but no, they insisted I have a prisoner number. They gave all the children. In fact, everyone had a prisoner number. And so that was really embarrassing. But we had no choice. We had to wear these dog tags in the process of the move. Here's a photograph that Dorothy took that was really embarrassing to the government. An armed guard is doing a body search on an elderly lady looking for weapons. And he found none, so he puts her on the bus. Behind the lady is a young child who's also getting a body search. I'm somewhere in the background waiting for my turn. And so that was an embarrassing photo. And the government said, Dorothy, you shouldn't have done that. And she took more of these kinds of photographs. And so the government took all 1,000 of her photos and put them in a vault at the University of California in Berkeley. And they were hidden for a long time. And still they started coming out and we saw the kind of work that she did. Amazing skill and determination to record history. And we're very, very pleased at her initiative. So we all got ready to go. There's one fellow who said, I'm not going. One fellow who defied General DeWitt. His name is Fred Korematsu. Fred was different. He had a white girlfriend, an Italian girl, and they wanted to get married and they wanted to live forever happily in California. They didn't want to go to a camp. So what they did, Fred went to a plastic surgeon with instructions to make me look white. That was his instructions. And the picture on the left is before surgery. The picture on the right is after surgery. He still looks Japanese. Terrible job. If it were me, I'd ask for my money back. That's awful. But no, Fred, he failed. And so his boss caught him, even though he changed his name, his appearance, he found a new job, but his boss caught him and reported him. He went to trial. The lower court said, you're guilty because you defied General DeWitt's order. And as a result, he was sent to prison, a regular prison. And then after he served his prison time, he was sent to a regular camp like the rest of the people. And so he failed his effort. So technically, no one escaped General DeWitt's orders in order to make sure we were all rounded up and taken to the prison. So the buses took us to the trains, and the trains took us, the trains are now circled with these soldiers to make sure we don't escape. And we got on the trains and we went to a temporary camp, a temporary facility, which was horse race tracks. All the horse race tracks in California, Oregon, Washington, they were closed for the duration of the war, and they were made into prisons. And we were held there for 3 months because that's how long it took to build the permanent camps like Heart Mountain. And so when the camp was finished, then they put us on the train to take us to our ultimate destination. That train took our family to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. It was a difficult ride. I remember 3 days and 3 nights sitting on a bench and eating cold sandwiches. It was not pleasant at all. So we eventually then made our way to Heart Mountain. And here's a map of all of the camps during the war. The dots in California on the left are the horse race tracks. And in the middle of the country are the permanent camps, the family camps. The one in Heart Mountain in Wyoming, there's one in Idaho, one in Utah, one in Colorado, 2 in Arkansas, and 2 in southern Arizona, and 2 on the eastern slopes of the Sierra Mountains in California. So that made up the 10 camps. They were huge. They averaged about 10,000 people per camp. The one at Heart Mountain was 12,000 people. And at that time, it was the 3rd largest city in Wyoming, created in a matter of 3 months. The first being Cheyenne, the second being Casper. So Heart Mountain at 12,000 people was quite a large facility. So where is Heart Mountain? Most people here know where it is, but a lot of people I speak to out back east, they never heard of Heart Mountain. But I tell them, no, if you've been to Yellowstone, you were close. And if you went east about 50 miles, you come across the town of Cody. And if you go further northeast, there's a little town called Powell. Heart Mountain is exactly halfway between Cody and Powell, named after the mountain that exists there. Here's a plan for the camp. It's a big facility. There were 30 blocks. Each block had 24 barracks, and each barrack contained 25 people. There were plans to build 3 schools because the government did not know how long this is going to last, assuming it'll be many years. They wanted to have education at least. So they planned to build 3 schools, and they almost finished the high school, but they didn't even start the grammar school, not even moved a bit of dirt. It was an empty field. And we wondered why, why I have to go to grammar school. And the answer came back, the local people got very upset at seeing new schools being created for prisoners. And they asked the government to stop. Don't quit building new schools because you're not giving us new schools. Why should we have new schools for prisoners? So the government stopped building the grammar schools. And so we had to pick some people out of the barracks and made some barracks into our grammar schools. So the government hired many workers, some 2,000 workers, mostly carpenters, came from across the country, came to Heart Mountain to build it because it was made of wood. And they worked very hard, day and night, until they finished the job in exactly 3 months. Here's a picture of the finished product. That mountain in the background is Heart Mountain. It's shaped like a heart. That's where it's got its name. And on the left, you see part of the 450 barracks. They're black because they're covered with tar paper. On the right side, you see the barbed wire fence and the guard tower. When I got there, the government gave me 2 numbers. The first number is my cell or room number. 14 is the block number, 22 is the barrack, and C is the room within that barrack. And that we all have to remember it because there's 450 barracks, they're all identical. If you don't know your number, you'll never find your barrack. So everyone had to remember that number. The second number is my prisoner number, 26737D. It still exists today. I still have that number. It is a file on me, and there's a file on every one of the 120,000 people in the National Archives in Washington. And it's important to have that file because it had every piece of paper that was generated in the camp. For example, if I went to the hospital, the medical records are in that file. I went to grammar school. My report cards are in that file. And you're not going to see them. They were bad. So anyway, it's complete. And anyone who is a relative of somebody who was in the camp, if they want to find out that information, I ask them to get a hold of me. I'll show them how to find these files and obtain them from National Archives. It's a very, very important resource for people who want to know what happened during the camps. Here's a picture of the more details of the security. There's a guard with a 30 caliber rifle on the left, and there's a guard tower with the floodlights lighting the camp at night. On the right side, there were signs in English and in Japanese, and it said stop for people of Japanese ancestry because there's a sentry, and he has orders to shoot if you try to cross this boundary. As a result, not one person escaped from the camp. Not a single person escaped. I should say, not a single person escaped permanently. Somebody asked a question at the end, did anybody even try? And I'll tell you a story about that. But anyway, that was the purpose of the security system, that no one escaped permanently from Heart Mountain. Here's the design of the barracks. There's 6 rooms. End ones were the smallest. They held 2 people or maybe a couple with a small child. And the second one next to it is the biggest room. It had up to 7 people. But the ones in the middle were for medium size, like the one in red. That's where our family was, 20 feet by 20 feet. And inside, when you walked in for the first time, it was depressing. Because what you see is something like this. There's no inside wall, no drywall. There's no insulation. All you're looking at is the inside surface of the outer wall, the siding, like a storage shed. And you put out 4 beds for 4 people, there's not much room for anything else. No electricity, no water inside the room. So that was really a tough environment, that knowing we may have to be there for several years. Here's a picture of the family in front of the barrack. That's me in a white shirt. My brother is in a sweater. My mother's on the left with a dark suit, and her sisters, 3 sisters, and an uncle. So this picture It's the only one we have of our family there at the camp. The toilets were embarrassing. If you can imagine 10 toilet bowls, I mean bowls, not seats, but simply bowls. And after meals, like after breakfast, there'll be a line of people, maybe 100 people. If you're lucky, you get to sit on a bowl. And when it came time to do your business, you notice something strange. There's no partitions, so you have 9 faces looking at you, watching you do your business. That was not easy, but we had to learn to do it, and that was tough. One of the disadvantages of the toilet system that we had. We had some food at the start. It looked something like this. On the table, there was bread, and the kid's looking at you, has a plate of potatoes, and the mother is eating a plate of pickled vegetables. Inside the pitcher was powdered milk. Now, the problem was the Japanese did not eat that type of food in 1942. We love fresh veggies. We like some protein, like poultry, and we like some fresh eggs and milk. And as a result, the farmers who were in the camp decided to help by creating farms out of the surrounding property immediately outside the camp. And there was sagebrush covered, really a desolate place. And they brought irrigation, water from Yellowstone, the river that flows nearby. And they used that for irrigating. And they planted seeds of the kind of veggies that we enjoy, we had Napa cabbage. You probably heard about Napa cabbage. And you may have heard about daikon radish, the long white radish. And those are the kind of veggies we love. And of course, we like roots and like root vegetables like carrots and the potatoes and so forth. But the point is, it was the kind of food we preferred. So after 1 year of hard work, we were able to get that type of food. The winters were miserable. Now, I'm not sure how cold it gets here in this area, but in northern Wyoming, that first winter, it was down to minus 28. The problem was the government sent us to Heart Mountain, never telling us we're going to Wyoming. It was a secret. I was wearing California clothing when I got off the train at Heart Mountain. And so when the first winter came, it was tough. It was a very, very difficult environment. You know, we had winds blowing at 50 miles an hour and cold temperatures and snow, blowing horizontally. We just weren't ready for that. It was not easy. We had a hospital. All it was 17 barracks with a corridor running between the barracks. And the problem was in our family, we had some medical problems. For example, my father had a case of glaucoma of his eyes. And all those of you who are probably familiar with glaucoma, you get tested every once in a while for pressure. And if you don't control it, then you can go blind. And in those days, my father had glaucoma since college. But when he went to San Francisco, he found a really good surgeon, an ophthalmology surgeon, who took care of his eyes. And he was able to see until he came to Heart Mountain. And he quickly found out no one at Heart Mountain, none of the doctors knew how to take care of glaucoma. So he went blind in camp. He never saw again once he entered the Heart Mountain camp. Oops, sorry about that. So he went blind, and that made life very difficult for our family financially. But that wasn't the worst in our family. The worst was Grandpa. We had a funeral for Grandfather. I watched him at the hospital. In a matter of 3 short months, my grandfather turned into skin and bones. He was really, he was starved, literally, and he passed away. And we wondered what happened. I looked at his medical records. I got a hold of his records, and I could not believe what I was reading. The doctors were general practitioners. They had a theory, and that theory is Grandpa may have colon cancer. As a result, they tried an experiment. They said, let's deny nutrition. Let's starve out the cancer. That was the theory. So they had stopped his feeding. He had no intravenous feeding, for example. In fact, the records show he had a laxative for cancer. That shows you the kind of lack of adequate quality we had at the camp. And I know of other families who had some similar types of problems with special diseases. But the point is, it's something that, even if you are in a prison, at least you should have reasonable, humane medical care. And it was lacking at Heart Mountain and all of the camps, for that matter. At the very end, we were allowed to go to Cody, a few at a time, to do some shopping. And I'll never forget, because every third store had this sign of no and then that J word. So the local business people didn't want us in their stores. That was really, that to me was my lesson there at Cody about what hatred really means. And I was very upset about that, but we had no choice. And we really, really felt bad about how the local people, they could have treated us better, but they didn't in that case. But I'll come back to the people of Cody in a moment. It's a little different story today. At the very end, an attorney in San Francisco named James Purcell, a white attorney, came to our rescue. What he did was he went to one of the camps near San Francisco, and he found families living in horse stalls. The government placed these families in horse stalls, and that was a terrible condition. And he said, that is not right. So he said, I'm going to do something. He filed a lawsuit against the government, naming this one lady named Mitsuo Endo. Mitsuo Endo is a Japanese American, just like me, a little bit older than me. And she led a perfectly loyal American life. Never been to Japan, never associated with Japanese societies. In fact, she worked for the state of California in the DMV department. And so Purcell picked her and named her that the government should not have done that because it's unconstitutional. And so he demanded her to be released and at the same time release everyone who is loyal. And the Supreme Court took it up. And the 9 justices decided by a vote of 9-0, unanimous, everyone agreed, let her go. That was unconstitutional, and let everyone else go. That's how we got out. It's the Supreme Court case, in the case of this Mitsuo Endo, that demanded the government release us because it was unconstitutional. Very, very positive activity by James Purcell. So we got on the train that took us back home, and the government decided to destroy the camp. They just didn't want evidence that there used to be a camp here. So what they did was they took 450 barracks, sold them for $1 a piece to anyone who will at least remove them. And the government converted that property into farms. So today, if you drive in that area between Cody and Powell, all you see is farms. There's no evidence that there used to be a prison there. So we're in the process of trying to restore the facility, and I'll mention that in a moment. So these are the barracks that are being removed. When we got home, life was worse than when we left, and we saw these kinds of signs, and it said, keep moving, don't resettle. This is no longer your neighborhood. And our parents had trouble finding jobs, finding housing. It was really difficult for the people who returned back home. When it was all over, we were not happy. And what we did, there was an activity called the redress movement. What we wanted from the government were the following things. We wanted our civil rights restored because the rule under President Roosevelt that still existed. We wanted an apology and we wanted some money. And that effort took 50 years by a team of attorneys working on Congress, working on the White House, trying to get them to agree that now is the time for redress to people who were in these prison camps. One of the steps in that process was an exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. And on the outside of the exhibit, here's Dorothy Lang's poster girl. And on the inside, there were photographs of families that lived in the prison. Like this family here is called the Masuda family. That's U.S. Army Sergeant Kaz Masuda in uniform. He came to say goodbye to his family. And after the picture was taken, he was shipped off to Italy. He fought for this country, and he died fighting for this country. At the same time he passed away, the family was still in the prison created by the same government. So to talk about irony, this photograph was really important. And so this photograph was sent to the White House, and it got to the attention of no less than President Ronald Reagan, Mr. Republican, Mr. Conservative. He said, now's the time. It is now time to sign a bill that came from Congress. And he signed it, and that gave us the three things that we wanted. Especially important was the apology. And 2 years after that, in 1990, I received a letter from the first President George Bush, H.W. Bush. And in that letter, there was the two words, sincere apology. That felt really good, coming from President Bush. And there was a small check, by the way, included in the letter, so that helped out. More recently, 2 years ago, President Joe Biden made a speech on the occasion of the anniversary of the signing of that executive order. And in that speech, he stated that he reaffirms the federal government's formal apology to the Japanese Americans. So now we have three presidents of the U.S. who have stated an apology, and that really made us feel much, much better. It was what we were looking for in the way of something important, what was happening before. Heart Mountain today is beautiful, it's still there. And what we did was different than most other camps. Most other camps put up monuments. We built a school. We decided it's more important to have a school, and it's called a learning center. On the outside, it looks like a barrack, but on the inside, there's a series of schoolrooms. And we bring kids all year round. School buses come in and we give them tours of the entire facility and inside the schoolhouse. And that's how they learn. And that's an operation that is really working very well. During the summer, we bring in school teachers, history teachers from across the country. We have a grant from the federal government to bring in teachers to give a 1 week intensive training on what happened. And so they can go back to their classrooms and teach. And also we capture all of the visitors to Yellowstone. We have the buses stop at our camp. And so all these people, not knowing they're going to go look at a prison, are subject to our treatment for about a 1 hour program that we designed. So that's our activity. We keep training people, teaching people with this learning facility, this center. Very, very important. So when we built that center, by the way, 10 years ago, I went to Cody. I went up and down Cody, the Main Street, just like I did when I was there during the war. And I looked in the windows looking for something interesting, and I found this sign on every window in Cody. Every window had the sign, "Welcome, Japanese Americans." My goodness, the people have changed since I was there during the war, and the change for much better. So we're always happy to see that. I'm going to wind down here and close off with some snapshots of my buddies. Remember, I talked about Kobe Kobayashi. Well, most of us, our parents urged us to go to get a good education, the best we can afford. And so most of my friends and I, we went to Berkeley, across the bay, UC Berkeley, and we became professional. Kobe became a pharmacist. He did very well and very successful in the pharmacy business. Remember Willie Ito. Willie was different. He did not want to go to college. He knew what he wanted to be. He wanted to be the world's best cartoon artist. And I guess it's okay if you're really good. So what he did was he went to an art school, and he was hired by Walt Disney. And he did very well at Walt Disney. He became a director of their quality programs. And I see Willie about once a month. He's doing okay. But I want you to see an example of a Disney cartoon, which is really a movie. The movie is called Lady and the Tramp. You may have seen that. Is that the two dogs are sipping a noodle at an Italian restaurant until their lips met. It was a very interesting scene. Willie was the artist. Willie became the artist for the Lady and the Tramp, and that's how he became famous. He did very, very well at the Disney organization. Another lady that I remember, a lady named Toshi Ito. That's her, after she got married, had a family. That young boy that you see, you'll recognize him as Judge Lance Ito of the O.J. Simpson trial. And Lance is a nice guy outside the courtroom. I see him once in a while. But Lance is the son of my friend, Toshi Ito. I went to Berkeley. I went to UCLA grad school. I loved engineering. Hired by the Boeing Company. I helped develop their rockets. We put up a lot of satellites into orbit. And that was a great, great career I had for 42 years. And I'm enjoying a great retirement program that Boeing put on. So Boeing did me very, very well, and I'm pleased with my work that I did. But after I retired, I got a call from Cheyenne about 14 years ago. A lawyer in the Department of Justice here, a few buildings away, gave me a call and said, "Mr. Mihara, can you give a talk about your experience at camp? We're having a conference." I said, "Sure, I can talk." So I got real busy getting ready with some of my stories, and I gave a talk, and it went very well. And as a result, many DOJ offices around the country asked me to come, and I got speaking in DOJ offices in Washington, San Francisco, LA, and other places. And then I thought it might be helpful to teach at a school, and better yet, teach at a conference of history teachers. So I went to a national history teachers conference, gave a talk, and many teachers asked me to come. And that's how it began. I started talking. I've completed over 500 talks all over the country, and also in Europe and in Far East. So I'm trying to get to as many people as I can in the short time I do have remaining. And so I enjoyed that. What happened to the poster girl, that darling image of Dorothea Lange? Well, she grew up. She looks more like this today. Her nose is the same as before. Her eyes are the same. She calls it a Japanese nose and eyes. And she changed her name. She changed her name twice. Her first name used to be Hideno, and she changed it to Helene. Her last name used to be Nakamoto, another typical Japanese name. And she changed that to Mihara. We've been married for 70 years. No, and Helene never knew that Dorothea took this photograph of her as a child until one of our relatives saw that image at a museum and said, "Oh, that's you when you were a baby or a child," and that's how she found out. So we have a wall full of her pictures that come in various forms, between postcards and big posters hanging in the wall of our house. So I'm going to conclude with a statement or question. Why did these camps exist? Why did they exist? And the answer is, I told you. Remember, I told you about prejudice, about racial hatred, and I told you about hysteria. Remember the headlines and the billboards. And then there are some people who were greedy. They wanted our property, because if we had 1 week to sell, those prices went way down quickly, and a lot of people took that opportunity to buy property. Therefore, this greed was there. But most important, some leaders who failed to honor the Constitution. And when you have that combination of prejudice, hysteria, greed, and leaders, then I think it could happen again to other people. It almost happened at one time to Germans. Remember that scene where the Germans were almost there, but the generals decided not, and Italians could have been there. More recently, after 9/11, it was discovered this Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, tried to get on an airplane with a bomb in his shoe, and it was discovered he's a Muslim American. So a lot of people called for Muslim Americans to be put away. And there are similar cases in more recent times of other groups. And I simply say, it could happen again, unless we're on our guard to make sure that the proper leadership and the decisions are made in a more favorable way. And so that's an important point. This could have been your son looking at an armed guard worried, where's he taking me? This could be your daughter inside the prison after 3 years asking, when am I going to get out of here? And this could be your son or child trying to climb out of the prison, not knowing that there's a guard with a gun pointing at him. So I simply say, and never again to anyone at all, never again. Well, thank you very much. That's the end of my talk. I wanted to, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I wrote a book. It's got many things that happened in the camp and things that I enjoyed. Some problems that came up. There was a time when my mother was almost shot. Other things that I think you'll find interesting. And it's available here. I brought 120 books on this tour. I only have 18 left. And so if we run out, I can arrange to get you more. But the point is, you're welcome to it, and ask for $20, which is discounted. All the money from my speaking and the books go to the camp, the school. And so pleased to be able to autograph that for you. If any of you know of other groups who might be interested in my talk, I can be accessed through my website. On the first page, it simply is a form that says, ask me to come and give a speech, and that's no problem. I'd be happy to do that. So with that, in conclusion, maybe we can turn up the lights and ask for questions. If anyone has any questions, I've just about fielded every question possible. So I'll go around as much as I can. Yes, in the back row. I'm hard of hearing, so you're going to have to speak up and repeat it.
Other young men in the camp.
I'm sorry?
The other young men in the camp.
Yes, other young men.
That went into the service.
Yes.
And served the
Yes.
country during the war.
Yes.
And were recognized with medals.
Absolutely. Every camp, the government asked for volunteers. Imagine coming to the camp, the government who put us there asking our sons and daughters to serve. But they came, and many of them joined. And then the draft came, and the military draft came, and many people were forced to then join. One of the large groups that was formed was called the 442nd. You may have heard of this group of Japanese Americans who fought in Europe. The most highly decorated unit in the war, in World War II. As an example, 21 Congressional Medal of Honor winners in a single unit. So that indicates the quality of the soldiers that were fighting for this country. But 30,000 of us fought in the country. 30,000 Japanese Americans fought for this country, while the government put us in prison at the same time. Okay, anyone else have any questions? Yes.
How did you have money when you went into coding?
Good question. Where did we get our money? In fact, it was worse because the government froze our bank accounts. We could not touch the money that we had in the bank accounts in San Francisco and elsewhere. As a result, we had to find work. Well, it turns out the government had a lot of work. They only sent 30 people to manage the camp and about 100 guards. So there was a lot of work. There was, kitchen helpers, there was hospital staff, there were teachers, lots of work to be done. And so anyone who could work really had a job. The problem was the pay rate. They gave for the lowest level of skilled workers, unskilled workers, they gave $12 a month. They gave professionals like teachers, doctors, and other professionals $19 a month. And so with that amount of limited money, we had to buy what we needed. And so what we did have a problem with clothing, especially in that first winter. The government looked into their warehouses for warm clothing. They found, You ever heard of the word Navy peacoats? You know what Navy peacoats are? Wool, real heavy. So they sent them to all the camps. The problem was they're all adult. And imagine a 9-year-old boy was swimming inside this Navy peacoat. So the parents had to spend money to buy clothing for the children. So, but it worked out eventually. You know, we did have some clothing, and we got some money from the government. There was a small clothing allowance in addition to the pay. I forgot the amount. It's like maybe $10 a month per person or something, but it was very small. Yes.
So after this was all over, were you able to access, get into your accounts?
Oh, yeah. After the war was over, then the government released a hold on the bank accounts. We were able to get back our money, you know, and get access to the money.
With interest or no?
What was that?
With interest or no?
Oh, I don't remember. I suspect the interest was small if there was anything, but the main point was, you know, no, they didn't take away our money. We finally got it back. Yeah. Anyway, I usually get a question: how much money did you get, and what'd you do with it? I call it a high school question, and the answer is $20,000 per person who was living when Reagan signed the bill. So 50 years after the fact, we got a check, those who are living, for $20,000. And the way they got that number is if a U.S. soldier was caught in enemy territory, he would be in an enemy prison, either Europe or Asia, for 3 years. As soon as he came out, the government would pay him $20,000. That's what they would give a U.S. soldier. So they figured that's what these people deserve. The problem is interest. 50 years worth of interest from the time the injury took place until we were paid. It should have been closer to 120,000. If I were to send an invoice for my injury today, I would send a bill for my professional services for $20 million. But I took the money. In our family, what we did was we pooled the money, those of us who survived, and we sent our grandkids to college, and that worked out real well. So all of our grandkids are graduated from college, and we're happy about that. Anyone else? Any question? Yes.
What happened to your parents' lovely house they had in San?
Oh, the house. Most people lost their homes, like I mentioned. They couldn't service the mortgage, and it was a real problem. My father was lucky. He knew a white attorney in San Francisco. He had a friendly relationship because of his job being in the newspaper business. He got to know this lawyer who was a very famous lawyer in San Francisco. And he and his wife, the lawyer and his wife, took care of our house. And so they rented it out, paid the mortgage, took care of it. So when we came home, we moved right back in to the same house. So we were really fortunate. Not the case with many other people. They lost homes. It was bad. Anyone else? Any question? Yes.
And now, there was a Boy Scout troop
Yes.
up there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. The parents realized it's a problem for the children, what to do with the young people, because after school, there's a lot of time. Weekends are a lot of time. And so they developed lots of programs like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. There were some 12 troops, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts in the whole camp. And so it was a very active program. And there were other things, developing skills, arts and crafts. As young people at my age, we did some strange things for fun. Like that area was the land of the Native American Indians, or the Crow tribe. And there were lots of arrowheads all over the place. So we would go arrowhead hunting, make up collections and have contests. We also did some funny things, strange things, like we would go out and kill rattlesnakes. You know, for city slickers, that was fun. And we would cut off the rattle and then they'd take a collection of rattles and have a contest. And some people made a zoo of snakes and scorpions. And so these are the kinds of fun things. And there's a lot more things. You got to read my book. There's more things that we did in order to have fun. Anyone else? Any questions? Yes.
Did they let you go outside to catch these rattlesnakes? Go outside of,
Good question. The answer is no.
so they were up there.
We were waiting and we found some guards were sleeping. And if they're sleeping, they're not looking out the window of the guardhouse. So we would open up the barbed wire, sneak out and look for more arrowheads and rattlesnakes. And sometimes the guards wouldn't even show up. And so that was meant, lots of space to go out. But we always came back. No one left permanently. Always by sunset, we came back. But toward the end, they give us passes, a day pass. We were allowed to go to Cody and Paul, but it had instructions only good until sunset of that day. And we had to go back home. Anyone else? Yes.
I have been up there to
Oh,
the
yeah,
museum.
okay.
And am I misunderstanding that? I understand after you planted all the gardens
Right.
and everything, the people in Cody would then hire some of you to come because they thought you did such a good job. You went up and helped the farmers.
Oh, yeah, about helping the farmers. In fact, that took place before the farms were created. The local farmers was short of help. They went to fight the war, and they wanted help. And so the farmers around there who had potatoes and sugar beets, they wanted some help to harvest. And so they came to the camp and asked for help. And the government allowed young men who were able to help under supervision went to help and harvest the crop. And so, yeah, that activity took place before the farms were created. And that was the first step. The people that first summer, they needed help right away. And so that's what happened in 1942. Anyone else? Any questions? Yes, over here. Say that again?
Lawyer that
Yeah,
ultimately got this.
right,
conviction.
right.
Is that the only person that filed charges against government?
Well, it was a group activity of lawyers who demanded the redress, the three things I mentioned. We wanted our civil rights restored, we wanted apology, we wanted some money. That effort took a team of lawyers working on Congress and working on the White House. Until the bill came that Reagan signed. So that was a really good effort by these people. But the fact that it took 50 years is really not good. It should have happened much, before that. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Have there ever been talks of a movie or a documentary, even to get more notoriety?
Say that again. I'm hard of hearing.
Have there ever been talks of a movie or a documentary that would come out to even get more notoriety?
Oh, yeah. There have been several movies on the topic. One of the more famous ones was the one that was the story at the Manzanar camp in California, where some of the fishermen escaped to go fishing in the Sierra Mountains. I forgot the name of it, the Fishermen of Manzanar or something like that. And there's been some other programs. There was a musical in Broadway featuring George Takei, the actor, and it talked about the people in the camps. And so, yeah, there've been some stories. There's a lot of books out. So, but it's not many people do what I'm doing. In fact, I'm the only one in the country who's doing what I'm doing across the country. There are a few local people who speak in California and so forth, but unfortunately, I wish there were more of me. I can't last forever. Anyone else? Yes.
Were you able to practice your faith?
Practice
your faith?
Oh, practice the faith, religion. Yes, the government said we could do anything we wanted in the camp, except escape. So there are many religions. There were 6 different types of Buddhism in the camp. And there was a Protestant, there was a Catholic. So there, there were many faiths, and we were allowed to practice almost any faith that we wanted. The only requirement from the government, which is a strange one, we were not allowed to teach the Japanese language in the camp. And so even though there were many professionals who were teachers, no, they were not allowed to teach Japanese. So many of our adults learned English in the high school at night. So we had a high school education program for adults, and but we were not allowed to teach Japanese. Strange. Anyone else? Yes.
So how long were you actually in the camp?
How long was I actually in the camp? I was in there exactly 3 years. Exactly 3 years. We were told, my father was told by the government, we recommend don't go back to San Francisco because there's a lot of hatred and hostility. And so we settled first in Salt Lake City. We tried it for 3 years and it did not work too well. So we finally then wound up back home, and it worked out okay in our case. Anyone else? Yes, in the back. Well, I wish something had happened to him in the way of punishment. He went to his grave honorably with all the records and medals and everything that he deserved. He never gave an apology. DeWitt never apologized. Which is interesting because now we have 3 presidents who have apologized. We have some state governors who have apologized, but we haven't had an apology from DeWitt, and also a major Army lawyer who worked for him, who wrote a lot of these rules. They never apologized. Unfortunate. Anyone else? Well, thank you. Oh, one more. Yes, in the back.
Will you go next to speak?
Where would you go next?
To speak.
Where will you go next?
Where am I going next? I keep forgetting. I got to look at my calendar. Let's see. I'll be in a place called Camarillo, California. I have requests to go to Texas. In fact, a lady who used to work for George W. Bush came to the camp and heard me talk. And so she invited me to go to the Bush Library in Texas and give a talk. So I've got requests all over the country. And I'll be in DC in November, speaking to a large group. I'll be getting an award in Massachusetts called Salem, Massachusetts. I don't know if those of you remember history about the Salem witches. Remember that story? All these witches were hung or burned at the stake. Well, they created an honor, an award for the person who fights social justice, fights for social justice. And I've been named the winner for this year, and I'm going back in November. Thank you. So that works out well. Anyone else? Yes.
So did any of Wyoming's governors ever apologize?
That's a good question. Did any Wyoming governor apologize? The answer is no. And I'll tell you what, the governor at that time, 1942 of Wyoming, made a speech, and it's in record. He made a speech to a conference of governors that anybody escapes from Heart Mountain, they should be hung on the closest pine tree. Yeah. He never apologized. Absolutely never.
Who was the governor?
I'm sorry?
What was governor?
Who was the governor?
Oh, I forgot the name.
We can look it up.
Anybody got a good memory, or look it up on the internet? It was a common name, as I remember. I just don't remember the name. Yeah. What's that? Smith.
Smith. Oh,
Smith.
oh, Smith. Oh.
What was the first name?
Nels. Nels, N-E-L-S.
Nell Smith. And name sound familiar?
Yeah.
Nell Smith. We would love to have a governor of Wyoming finally express his sentiments that he thought it was wrong. And he apologizes for the bad things that happened during those days. We would love that. But anyway, we're working on it. Yes.
I think I'd like to say on behalf of the audience, we apologize.
Oh, appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love that. Thank you very much. Well, with that note, I want to thank all of you for coming. And I do have a book I'd be happy to autograph. I only have 18 left. So come and help yourself if you'd like. And I'll be here for a little while to do that. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. We have some upcoming events. On October 12th, we'll have a Tom Horn panel. We're also partnering with the Laramie County Public Library if you would like to attend. And on Monday, October 30th, Governor Dave Freudenthal will be talking about his book, and it will be held in this room. Thank you for coming.